Couple quick announcements. Dessert will be available at the next break. There is sugar in your future, and there will be more caffeine. Also on the Wi-Fi, important note please, it may work now. We're crossing our fingers. But please don't try to register 4 devices per person. We're actually trying to work with a limited 256 pool. So if you could just use 1 device on the network and let's see what happens, that would be helpful. So please don't have your phone auto-connect if you're also trying to tweet from a box. And I feel like there was some other note that I was supposed to tell people. If you're interested in the Hack Day, I suspect we are totally under-registered for the amount of people who would be interested in participating. That's Saturday from starting hands on keyboards at 10, although the doors open at 9, till up to 4 o'clock at Swissnex, which is downtown Montgomery, Columbus area. If you're interested in that, and if you have not registered, please send an email to peter@archive.org. It's the shortest email that I have, and then we'll send your names over. Thanks. Okay, so with that, Peter.
All right, everything good? Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right? Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm here today, I'm Peter Armstrong, co-founder of LeanPub, and I'm here today to talk about standardizing Markdown mapping to books and documentation. Now, the title, standardizing, mapping, documentation, then you're thinking, right? By the way, best URL ever. Oh my God. Just type this in, folks. I recommend going to this picture. It's fantastic. I'll wait. So my title, I think I've achieved something. I think I've beaten Worthwhile Canadian Initiative as the most boring title of all time, ever, for anything. Now, and I'm Canadian, so I can tell that joke. Sorry. Okay, but I am not going to deliver a boring talk, hopefully. Hopefully it will be entertaining. That is what I try to do. I'm going to talk about 4 things. What's Markdown? Boring. Why is Markdown a great way to write books and documentation? Possibly more interesting. Great thing about Markdown Standards, and what's LeanPub doing? So, first of all, what's Markdown? Who here knows what Markdown is, and I'm going to bore them to death how I explain it? All right, awesome. I will go super fast. John Gruber made it. Help from Aaron Swartz. Lots of it. Who knew? Markdown text to HTML conversion tool for web writers. Basically, write in Markdown in your favorite text editor, then get HTML out. Nobody likes writing HTML. Markdown lets you write the part you want to write easily. So it started as 2 things, the format and a program. Nobody cares about the program anymore. The format lives on data. Now, and then there's a really long thing about the design goals. The interesting thing about Markdown for me is you can basically put all the syntax that actually matters on 1 slide. Pound signs H1, 2 pound signs H2. Guess how many are 3 pound signs? 4. H3. So yeah, images, links, whatever. It's all really straightforward. This is basically everything anyone needs to know about Markdown to write a book on LeanPub or to write most web pages. So that brings me to my next slide, which is why is Markdown a great way to write books and documentation? And basically the answer is simplicity. So going back again to the design goals of Markdown, write using an easy to read, easy to write, plain text format. To make the syntax as readable as possible, publishable as is in plain text. And the single biggest source of inspiration for Markdown syntax is the format of plain text email. So now if you think about this a little deeper, you realize there's another aspect of what makes for Markdown such an attractive place to write. No layout options. So who here is a publisher or works for a publisher? Okay, so my syntax slide had nothing about layout. I'll show it again in case you didn't memorize it all. There's nothing here about layout. There's just how big of a heading is something? Is something bold or italic? Is it a bulleted list or a numbered list? And there's links and images. Now, when you're writing as an author, Our position at LeanPub is formatting is procrastination. Right? Writing a book is hard. And if you can spend time mucking around with page breaks in Microsoft Word, then your publisher will just get mad at you and undo it anyway. Right? So writing is hard enough. Our contention is that WYSIWYG programs like Word are the worst thing to happen to writing in human history. Because imagine, say, if Nietzsche had been forced to write using Word. Right? So this is actually an ad for a program we don't make. It's called IA Writer. It's one of those distraction-free writing apps for Mac, and it's really quite good. And it's actually got a really good understanding of Markdown. So it happens to make your Markdown look slightly even nicer if you just type Markdown in it. Now, I've been working on LeanPub with my co-founder Scott and a bunch of people for 5 years. And I've finally figured out what authors should do when they're writing. Wait for it. Right. Right? Book layout and formatting should be done once after the book's done. This is true whether you're self-publishing, publishing in progress on LeanPub, or whether you have a publisher. As publishers, you don't want your authors trying to do a half-assed job of formatting things. You're just going to have to paste it all into InDesign or strip it out and then redo it anyway, right? Now, more interestingly, though, is what's coming in the future. So we're talking about books in browsers, but actually I'm more interested in books in your pocket on your phone. And in terms of the rise of mobile is going to be the dominant way, as far as we're concerned, that most books will be read. And that means that layout choices for most books are basically irrelevant. Sorry. And worse than that is that what we really have, there's a recent article in the New York Times about Amazon and monopsony and all that. What we really have coming is an oligopsony. So monopoly, monopsony is one buyer. Oligopsony is few buyers. So basically, these three companies, two of them make phones. Chances are, who here uses an iOS or Android phone? Right? So if you're going to read a book on your phone, Google or Apple gets 30%, period. Right? If you bought the book easily. And Amazon makes, I don't have to explain Amazon to you. Now, going back to what this means in terms of writing books, though, I'm not here to talk about that. Book design on mobile basically is typography. If I have something, I'm reading a book on my phone, the only thing I can really do to actually improve the reader's experience is have really great typography. Because I'm going to be my phone, I still have an iPhone 5S, and so my phone's screen is smaller than someone else's. My eyesight is maybe better or worse than someone else's, so you can't really care about widows and orphans and all your stuff anyway, but you can have good typography. So as far as we're concerned, but the great thing about typography is authors don't have to think about that when they're writing, right? So this is why we think Markdown is a great way to write, is it's simple and it completely ignores layout. And if you think about, in web, the popularity of the layer cake design, you basically have a vertical stack of stuff. That's because you can ignore layout. It works great on phones. It works great everywhere, right? So that's the great thing about Markdown for writing. But now I want to talk about the great thing for Markdown Standards. And the great thing about Markdown Standards is there's so many to choose from. Actually, there's none. Sorry, I lied. There's zero Markdown standard. There are many Markdown implementations, many Markdown extensions, and there's no Markdown standard. In fact, there's a passive-aggressive thing called BabelMark, which actually not passive, it's awesome. Called BabelMark. John McFarlane, the guy who created Pandoc, made it. Basically, you get to test out this random stuff against a whole bunch of different Markdown things and see what happens. But if you think about this, why are people adding extensions to Markdown? Well, we're adding some too, so I guess we're part of the problem. We're adding things like tables, which is we didn't come up with an extension, we just used one of them. External code samples. People at LeanPub, the bulk of our authors write computer programming books. Computer programming books have computer programs in them. There's no syntax in Markdown for embedding external files easily into Markdown, so we just adapted the image syntax for that, right? Asides, etc. And so this has led to an interesting episode. This lack of a standard for Markdown has led to a really interesting thing. Who's familiar with the whole standard Markdown episode? Okay, not many. Okay, cool. So about 4 years ago, Jeff Atwood, a blogger who writes coding horror, wrote an interesting blog post called Responsible Open Source Parenting. And you can tell this isn't going to end well. If someone's talking about what John Gruber and Markdown and what is Markdown abandonware and blah 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 blah, and that was in 2009. And then he came out with, along with some other people, in this year in September, with Standard Markdown. Well, at the time that the blog post was initially published, it was called Standard Markdown, without the involvement of the creator of Markdown. And then it quickly got changed to Standard Flavored Markdown, and then it quickly got changed again to Common Markdown, and then it kind of had an apology, and the word Markdown was removed, and it got called Common Mark. And on the internet, this is that's what the internet did, right? The internet loves to fight. And so the interesting thing is about this is the question of, there's this assumption that you need standards, right? And we need a standard Markdown. And the question is, do we need a standard Markdown? In many ways, for the lack of a Markdown standard is one of the reasons that it's really dominant. Because people, like individuals and also companies, can add extensions to handle use cases without having to put things through a standards body and do the process, which takes a really long time. And so people can iterate quicker, and then if you can iterate quickly in a way that serves your business needs, that's a really big incentive to do so. And I think in some ways, John Gruber probably recognizes this. I've never spoken to him. But if you look at Twitter, someone's complaining about why can't everybody just use the same flavor of Markdown? And then his response was because different sites and people have different needs. So one syntax wouldn't make everyone happy. So this is interesting. You have a thing, Markdown, created about 10 years ago, which is a great way to write HTML and a great way to write books and documentation. And the core of Markdown is basically really so simple that everyone, regardless of what they do to it, doesn't break the core. But then you have all these little extensions around the edges, adding things like tables or, in our case, code samples or whatever. So that's where we've gotten to right now. So now I want to talk about what we're doing around this. Two things, both of which I'm announcing here today. First of all, so recently I was in Hawaii on vacation, and I was sitting on my balcony. This is a picture I took from my balcony because after I figured out everything, I wanted to take a picture. Working, I was thinking about Markdown, and because that's what you do in Hawaii, right? And about how at LeanPub we use a superset of Markdown, and we've added extensions to help our authors, especially those who write programming books, and we've documented those. And besides adding some extensions to Markdown, we've also created a mapping to book concepts. Because if you think about it, well, what is Markdown, right? It's you type a plain text file, ASCII text or Unicode text, and in there things like £, or 2 £, or asterisk, or 2 asterisks have special meaning. But they have special meaning in that they produce certain HTML. Now at LeanPub, we make books and ebooks, and we make PDF, EPUB, MOBI, and HTML. And so besides using Markdown, we have a mapping of Markdown concepts to book concepts. And so £, in Markdown is H1. £, if you write a Markdown book on LeanPub and you click the publish button, £, turns into chapter. It's the biggest heading in a book, right? 2 £, section. 3 £, subsection. Totally straightforward, right? Like this the most obvious thing in the world, but we came up with it. Bold and italic are the same because they're the same in books as they are on web pages. But this notion of mapping Markdown to book concepts is something we did, and we just did it, and we documented it, but we haven't properly formally specified it either. And I realized we should finally, we're 5 years old now, we should actually do this work properly. Fully specify our Markdown flavor. And I'm Canadian, so I add a U in flavor. How we map Markdown to book concepts. What extensions we've added. Now, if we're going to specify how we use Markdown, we need to name that thing. But we don't want to call ourselves super duper standard, totally official Markdown. We need to come up with a name, since we have a deep respect for John Gruber, who's the creator of Markdown, and we need a name for what we're doing that conveys the sort of warmth and love that we have for Markdown and for writing and for writers, while not implying, hey, this is officially endorsed by John Gruber, and not implying we're canonical or official. And it's naming things, right? The 2 hard problems in computer science, naming and caching, right? What's that? No, those are only hard for the first year. Okay, and getting the .com wouldn't hurt. So I'm here today. Well, that's another done on a drum roll. Markua. So, also pronounced Markwa if I say things quickly, but and so either is fine. So what is it? It's a superset of Markdown. Well, we don't support inlining HTML because if you're writing an HTML producing thing, supporting inlining HTML is trivial. If you're writing something that has giant PDF, EPUB, MOBI, and stuff, supporting arbitrary inline HTML is ridiculous, and so we don't. So Markua is a superset of almost all of Markdown that has a strictly defined mapping to book concepts and to documentation concepts. And it generates PDF, EPUB, MOBI, and HTML. Now, that last line is, Scott gave me a hard time about it. He's like, it's a format. It doesn't generate PDF, EPUB. I'm like, no, tools take that, use a well-defined mapping, and produce, this is long enough as it is. It generates PDF, EPUB, MOBI, and HTML. You like my subtitle, right? So, Markua is writing paradise. And since I literally thought it up sitting on a balcony in Waikiki, I love my designer. He's great. And so he made me some postcards for it. Because when you come up with anything, you need postcards for it. So I just love them. I don't know why. They make me very happy. And so we're doing the standardization work at markua.com. Now, there's almost nothing there right now, but it's basically what we're doing is taking what we've done on LeanPub with defining the mapping from Markdown concepts to book concepts, and we're going to properly specify exactly how this works, exactly what extensions we've done are. This is going to be completely open spec. Anyone can use it. Instead of doing all this work and then going, hey, world, here it is, we've done almost no direct work on this. I'm just going, hey, world, here we're doing this, and we're doing it. And it's going to be, like, we hope, a helpful contribution to the work that people do of using simple formats like Markdown to produce books. So that's the first thing. Okay. Second thing. Now, in my little byline, I snuck something in. I said Markua is a superset of almost all Markdown that has a strictly defined mapping to book and documentation concepts. Huh? LeanPub's an ebook startup. What am I doing? Turns out people don't just write books. Even though we are at a place called Books and Browsers, people write other things. And our question and over the years we've been pinged by people, and hey, help. And we're like, no, we're not helping you. We're ebooks. But it turns out people in the enterprise don't just write in Word and use track chain. We shouldn't condemn them to just do this. This should not be the best thing in the world. When we think about how people write documents together, what you really need is the workflow we have, like GitHub-style pull requests. Like, if you're a programmer, who here is actually programs for a living, like writes code for a living? Okay, so if you're a coder, we have this. Writing software is hard. Writing software is hard. But the great thing about this is, since it's so hard, we've worked really hard building these amazing tools to make things better. Version control systems, we had centralized ones. I'm old enough. I remember CVS before Subversion, and now we have Git, right? So we're going from centralized to distributed version control, and then that's not easy enough. We also need to have these wonderful tools like GitHub around our version control systems to collaborate on stuff, right? Now, in software we have that. In books you have track changes in Word. Also, what you need for documentation is you need to be able to write in multiple formats as input, and you need to be able to produce multiple formats as output. And we already do that for books, right? With LeanPub, what LeanPub is a place where authors use LeanPub to publish in-progress books, and publishers can use LeanPub to publish in-progress books. And we're just coming up on $2 million in royalties paid to our authors, about $1 million of it in the last year. And so we've been at this whole turn Markdown into books thing for 5 years. And we've learned a lot from it. And we realized, why can't we do this for the enterprise? And so we are. And so what this is basically taking Markdown or Markua or Data, which is an XML thing for documentation, and producing PDF, EPUB, MOBI, and HTML. And we're launching it today here. So enterprise.leanpub.com or leanpubenterprise.com. And the idea is it's like GitHub-style thing combined with the generation engine inside LeanPub. And this is going to be what we do with where our publisher program goes. Like right now, we have a publisher program at LeanPub, which a couple of publishers are using, but also mainly is used by authors as their own imprint. And the current publisher program at LeanPub is kind of a glorified co-author workflow, right? You just all share a Dropbox folder on a book, yay. And sure, you can do it, but we don't really provide tooling to support collaboration around the thing. And so where we're going with this is the idea of the whole pull request workflow that you get in GitHub is something that should really be extended to the way you author books. But you can't do that effectively if the way you author books is binary, because you can't have meaningful diffs of one Word document versus another Word document in binary, right? Which is why it's essential that if you're going to collaborate on a book on the internet, you need to have the book authored in a plain text tool, right? We use Markdown or Markua, right? There's also folks in enterprise use Dida quite often, and we want to support that workflow and basically have the tooling that's, as a software developer, you take for granted be something that's available to everyone. And so where we are right now is for authors, regardless of whether they have a publisher, we think LeanPub is pretty great. For publishers, there's us versus O'Reilly Atlas. And now for enterprise, again, us versus O'Reilly Atlas. So this is going to be fun for us. I'm really excited about where LeanPub is going with this. Thanks.